Hi, this is Nancy Ralsma with On Point TV and Quilting with Nancy. We are continuing our series, Sunset over Dublin. This is an 8-inch block quilt. There's 39 different blocks used in the quilt, depending on how big you want to make it. The 39 actually makes 41, which makes a perfect queen size quilt. We will get to the settings of it once we're done with all of our blocks. This is the book. This is a Sunset over Dublin book, 120 pages, all full color with very detailed instructions in how to make the block. And today we will be making the Old Maid's puzzle. So with the Old Maid's puzzle, there is two techniques that you will learn, and they're really more of a unit than a technique. One of them is called the bow tie, and the second is the kite. We'll start with the bow tie first. With the bow tie block, you'll be making half square triangles, and we've done that in a couple of the previous videos, so you can reference back to those if you need some tips on remembering how to make the half square triangles, and those are used in the bow tie. So the bow tie block is 2 half square triangles and 2 regular squares. Now I'm going to take this to my machine and sew them now. So working with our scant 1/4 inch seam allowance just as always, and I've got my leader in and my guidelines for quilting to help me with my scant 1/4 inch. We're going to take the first row, put the number 2 block on top, and start sewing. And then the second one. Now with the second one, keep in mind that the seam on the bottom is pressed toward the machine, so it's actually pressed up. So you want to be careful as you're putting this through your machine. Sometimes machines here right at the bobbin will have a kind of a little ledge right there. So be careful that that seam does not get caught in the ledge. There we go. So now these two are together. And I want to talk to you a little bit about pressing, because normally I want to tell you to press to the point of least resistance. And on a block like this, we can do it at first, but in the end, we're going to have to start doing something that I call flipping the seams. So with this block, we can press one point of least resistance to the left and the other to the right. And so I'm just going to do those with my iron quickly. Whoops. There. They are still connected. I like to keep that little thread connected in the middle just because everything is then lined up the way I need it. And then this will go right sides together. Want to be sure that you pin the center so that that stays connected. And my 2 ends look good, so I'm ready to go to the sewing machine. Sewing this, I'm going to leave the pin in, but always going nice and slow over top of that pin. Now with this block, I do want to do the seam separating. That's where we're able to separate that center seam. I want to, but the truth is it really doesn't help much in this block. You would think it would because you've got 4 squares, and that's the recipe for being able to do the seam separating. But in this block, to seam separate would mean that we would be pushing this seam up on top of this very heavy seam and this seam down. So in this case, I flip them to where they want to be, and I just have this one just fold this one over. So it is not seam separating, and this would be where one of those times that I would call it flipping the seam. So when you look at it, it might not look quite proper, but it will be the flattest solution for the front of the quilt. Oops, kind of flipped that one a little more than I wanted to. A little steam will fix that. There. So now the block is pressed to the point of least resistance on these points, but in the center, just press to one direction and then just flip that seam. So you'll make 2 of these. Now we'll move on to the kite block. Now with the kite block, it's really important to remember that because I spray sized all of my fabrics, I did that dunking that I did in the very, very first video. That means that when I have a block like this, it is a large square, and I cut it on the diagonal, those seams are bias edges. But because I had done the dunking, that means that the seam is going to still be pretty stable. I'm going to do the same thing with 2 of the 2 7/8 inch blocks, we need these to be cut on the diagonal too. So just lining your ruler up from point to point, cut once on the diagonal to yield 2 triangles for each square. And this is what this one looks like. The kite is the large triangle. I'm going to do it the way that it actually is in the block. Then you'll have your half square triangles with 2 pre-cut triangles. And when you're lining up the pre-cut triangles, you want to keep in mind that this edge, the long edge of those triangles, is on the inside, and those, by being the bias edge, will go together with the large triangle that has the bias edge. So this one would be like this and like that. So let's put one of these together. You're going to start by putting one of the pre-cut triangles onto the half square triangle. Now when you're doing this, it's important that you line up your edges straight. I don't know why, but it just seems that that alone is something that happens quite often, which means you're never going to have a straight block when you're done. So this 45-degree angle should line up with the 45-degree angle of the half square triangle below. So going to our sewing machine, I'm going to bring this triangle with me so we can just sew on the next one. I'm going to sew the scant 1/4 inch on that side. And then I can just finger press this one for right here by my machine. That'll keep that secure. And then my next will go on here. So now it is flipping this one up again, lining up the 45-degree angle. And I think it's best in this case to start sewing with the block flipped over. So instead of trying to sew with the little points here on the end, in this case it's just going to be easier to flip it over so you're not having to start and stop on those skinny little points. There we go. Now I can completely press this. And if all has gone according to plan, oops, got a little catch there. If all's gone according to plan, a couple of things will happen now. You'll see that the point of that half square triangle is at least a scant 1/4 inch from the bottom, and this newly constructed triangle should be the same measurement as the half square triangle in black. And I see that mine, let me see, mine is pretty darn close. If we flip this over, you can even see better. There we go. That means everything turned out quite right. Now I'm going to sew this seam, and I'm going to be very cautious right here at the middle that I sew just to the right of that intersection so that I don't lose my points. And this is one of those times that you have to start with the points of the triangle. There's no way around it. So be sure that you have your leader here so that the leader catches the fabric and it doesn't go down into your machine. Slowly over this thicker seam allowance. There we go. And be sure when you get here to the end, for some reason there's a tendency for people will kind of start sewing and sew off the end so they end up with a smaller 1/4 inch seam allowance there. This is when you might want to use one of your awls to hold it in place as it goes inside your machine so that it doesn't go too far to a small seam allowance. It happens all the time if you're not paying attention. All right, so this gets our kite block completed. So when I'm pressing this, I'm going to press this with the black going up. So the pressing will definitely be to the point of least resistance on this. Now this unit, the kite unit, this should be measuring 4.5, and actually the bow tie should too. So let's see how we did here. Diagonal to diagonal. It is a little bit big, so I'm going to try and do a little bit trimming, but I'm going to be very, very cautious. Maybe if I turn it this way. I want to be sure that that point and that point end up a 1/4 inch from the end. And I would rather have the block end up too big than to lose those points. So that should do it for this. I can trim a little bit off on this side, but I don't think there's anything up here to trim. And now when I spin it around, I want to trim it right to 4.5. And I've already got my glow line on my ruler so that I know where that is. Oops, don't move. And trim. So now that one is a perfect 4.5, and let's see how our bow tie turned out. It looks a little wonky. Actually, right here, that seam isn't completely pressed out. Let me fix that. It probably has to do with the flipping of that seam on the back. Oh, that's better. All right, so let's see what size he is. Actually, he's a little bit small. Well, he's a little small on one side and bigger on the other. So let's do some analysis here. I want to be sure that the blue points end up 1/4 inch from the edge. And if I do that, there is a little bit that I can trim here. If I turn that around, I don't think I'm going to be able to trim on the other side. So we put that right into 4.5. Yep, there is nothing, this little guy right up there, really nothing to trim. So that means he's a smidge small and this one's going to be spot on, which means they're going to ease together perfectly. So let me get the rest of these units made and then we'll put the block completely together. So my 4 units are made. I have 2 bow ties and 2 of the kite blocks, and we're going to go and sew that at the machine. So taking this and flipping it over, and I'm going to want to do this so that my, I'm going to do it where the rows will actually be connected. Okay. And I don't have to do any pinning right yet because my blocks all turned out just the right size. I don't have to do any easing. Sometimes if your blocks, your units don't turn out quite the right size, you'll want to do pinning so that you can ease the excess where it needs to be. Off onto my leader. Now this one, whoops, already has the rows connected. And I'm going to, actually, let's go to the ironing board with this. I'm going to show you how this one works. Because again, with this block, there's a lot of flipping as opposed to pressing, which looks nice and neat. If we press this to the point of least resistance, that means that this unit wants to go to the left, but look at this up here. Do I really want to force that on top of the other one? I don't think so. I'm going to let it lay into the right. So this will be a flipped seam right here and down here. So in the middle, that means I'll have the top one going to the left, the bottom one going to the right, and I'll be able to butt that seam right in the middle. Then I shouldn't have to do any others. But if your blocks don't turn out quite the right size, you will want to pin the edges so that you're sure that this is straight and this is straight. And then you can ease those in the middle. So one final seam. Nice and slow over the pins. And then the pressing solution for this will be some flipping of seams. So let's see what we can do. So right here, let's move my cutting mat out of the way so we can get a really good view of the pressing. There we go. All right. Because we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to do flipping of seams. Oops, gotta get that pin out of there. But I also do want to try to seam separate this. If I make this go, you know what? It will make no sense to seam separate this. Again, with seam separating, and you'll see that in the pinwheel block, if you go to the video on the pinwheel block, that means that you separate this so that the seams can press in opposite directions and then it opens that center seam. But if we do that, that means we're going to be trying to press this one to a very heavy seam and this one to a heavy seam. So don't do it. So instead, let's start with the 2 side seams, the first 2 that we did. Let's set that one. It's got a little bit of flipping going on here. And again on the other side. And now with the center seam, it's going to start with a little flipping. So we'll do right there, the flip there. And the very center won't really matter. Just press it to whatever side you're on and then flip, flip. So this seam is going to go one, we'll count. I think it's going to flip back 4 times. It might seem a little excessive, but it will give you the flattest block. There we go. So this seam started going down, then up, then down, then up. So 4 times. Now with a seam like this could be a candidate for doing a lot of spray sizing on it if you haven't stiffened up your blocks, but having stiffened up the blocks, I don't even have to spray size it now. So that's what it looks like from the front side. So just like always, I am going to do the measuring, and then I'll make sure it's 8.5 inches, possibly trim edges, but always being careful to never trim past those points. I always want there, I know I say it 100 times, you want to be sure that you have 1/4 of an inch past each and every one of these points. That's far more important than having your block be trimmed up to 8.5 inches. So that's another block done. We've got a few more techniques to show you, so I hope you will continue to join us on the Sunset over Dublin quilt. If you have any questions, contact me at quiltingwithnancy.com. The book is available on OnPoint-TV. That's where the book is. I think I said my email wrong. quiltingwithnancy@gmail.com. And have a great day.